this conversation is one that I just don't think gets enough airtime. I had to stop breastfeeding London during chemotherapy, and I still struggle to talk about it and say it out loud. No one talks about what happens to a woman when her breastfeeding journey ends in a way that she didn't choose.
One of the completely free ways that we can improve human longevity is through increasing breastfeeding rates. Hamlet cells are special cells that they don't exist anywhere else in the human body. They're not found anywhere else in nature apart from in breast milk. And they are these incredible white blood cells that are cancer killers. They are investigating breast milk and the cure for cancer. I've worked with mums with 16 and 17-year-olds who have still got a feeding trauma from when they were babies. One day, a nurse came back from holiday or annual leave and didn't check any of our notes and saw that she didn't have a feeding tube and took it upon herself to put a feeding tube back in her without me there to hold her, which obviously is horrible for the baby. I just basically had what I can only describe as a mental snap, like I felt something snap inside me. I've never really fully recovered from it, to be honest. And not only that, the nurse gaslighted me.
You've counted the calories, cut out the carbs, done the detoxes, the shakes, the reset, said no to the birthday cake more times than you can count. And come Monday, you start all over again. Not this time, not on my birthday, not on my watch. The reason it hasn't worked before isn't because you're lazy or broken. It's because of all these quick fixes will set you up to fail. We're living in a world of extreme diets, GLP-1s, shortcuts, and somehow the one thing nobody's actually giving you is real accountability. I'm Danni, I'm a mum of 4, bowel cancer survivor and women's health and fitness coach. I've coached women through this for 6 years. And a few years back, I ran a 4-week Kickstarter course that changed people's lives, and people still message me about it today. So I'm bringing it back, but better. No more Mondays. It's launching on my birthday, the 12th, and it's starting on the 1st of September. It's my gift to you. 4 weeks, not 8, not 12. Every single week, you're on a call with me. Real accountability, no hiding, no excuses, and definitely no more doing this alone. This isn't about before and after photos. It's about waking up and being fucking obsessed with being the person looking back at you. So what's it going to be? Endless quick fixes that you always have to start again, or a life-changing 4 weeks? I'm going to pop all the information and the link to sign up in the show notes. I'll see you there. Hello and welcome back to Life with Danni Duncan. I have a beautiful, beautiful guest on today. So strap in. If you've got kids around, maybe just go and hide in a cupboard somewhere because you're going to want to listen to this one. Today I have a guest on who I've been so excited to sit down with because this conversation is one that I just don't think gets enough airtime. Nicola D'Souza is a breastfeeding counsellor and infant feeding practitioner. But more than that, she's someone who is on a mission to normalise something that so many women experience but actually never get talked about, and that's breastfeeding trauma. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I wanted to have you on because obviously this is very personal for me, as you know. And as many of you listening know, I had to stop breastfeeding London during chemotherapy, and I still struggle to talk about it and say it out loud. So I want to be honest, this has been the hardest part of everything I went to. And we talk about birth trauma. Everyone talks about birth trauma. We talk about postpartum depression. But no one talks about what happens to a woman when her breastfeeding journey ends in a way that she didn't choose. So I'm glad you're here to tell us a little bit about your story and have a chat about it. So tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I'm as you said, I'm a breastfeeding counsellor and infant feeding practitioner. So I support families with breastfeeding mostly, but also anything to do with feeding your baby. So it might be bottle feeding, it might be combination feeding, it could be tube feeding. I had a premature baby. My daughter was premature. So it can be, how to sustain breastfeeding when you're in NICU or, hospital stays. So it can cover lots of different things. And I also help women stop breastfeeding very gently and slowly, for them and their little ones. So that's what my kind of passion is, and that came from, as you've already mentioned, my own feeding trauma that I experienced when my daughter was born. So she was premature, as I said. She was 35 weeks, which I didn't expect, and had an induction, not a very nice one. Like you say, we talk a lot about birth trauma, and there was definitely birth trauma there for me. But the biggest part of my trauma was, like yours, the feeding part. So we kind of established breastfeeding, and because she was premature, it was even more important that she was breastfed because she was too little to have formula. She'd have needed it. in the very beginning. So, you know, it was really pushed that we'd breastfeed. And for me,
Yeah.
that was the only bit I had kind of control over then. It sort of became this thing that kept my head above water, because everything else had not gone to plan. She was
Yeah.
poorly, she was in an incubator, but I knew at least the breastfeeding was going well, and I felt that that helped with my health anxiety
Yeah.
because I'm so scared of germs and them getting poorly. And so knowing that I was giving her my breast milk and it had all those antibodies in, that kind of comforted me. And essentially what happened, long story short, was that she had her feeding tube removed because we were breastfeeding and I didn't leave the hospital. So I stayed on the ward so that I could do all her feeds. And one day a nurse came back from holiday or annual leave and didn't check any of our notes and saw I was in the shower at the time. So I was probably on about 15, 20 minutes. Saw that she didn't have a feeding tube and took it upon herself to put a feeding tube back in her without me there to hold her, which obviously is horrible for the baby.
Yeah.
And then not only that, she tube fed her formula, even though there was
Oh,
an entire fridge and freezer full of my breast milk. And when I came back from my shower and I saw the look on everybody's face on the kind of NICU reception, and they told me what had happened, and this nurse came out and told me, I just basically had what I can only describe as like a mental snap. Like I felt
yeah.
something snap inside me. And yeah, I've never really fully recovered from it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that was and not only that, the nurse gaslighted me. She basically said I was doing what was best for the baby.
It's
So
just, yeah, it's just, you know what, I don't, you know, like, you know, I can't spare, I mean, obviously we've had babies in different countries, but it is wild. I don't know if, had this nurse had a baby? I don't, you know, was she a mother?
I don't think so.
Isn't it? Yeah, I remember actually, it's so funny that when you told me your story, when I had my twins, Harlow was in an incubator. And because I was also not doing very well, I was in recovery and I'd had a really bad, because I had a double birth anyway. They gave her formula straight up too. And I was, like awful. But we hadn't established breastfeeding because I hadn't had a chance. But she was having, again, I had breasts, like I had colostrum there for her. And I remember being very quick to be like, what are you doing? But I can't imagine establishing it, having a feeding tube removed, and then, like out of your control. Like what?
And I think you'll understand as well because you've had a baby in an incubator with tubes and wires. And once they take away something, they immediately look better, you know. So as soon as that feeding tube came out, because they said, we'll take it out because as long as you're not leaving, because what we don't want is for you to leave hospital and then we've got no way to feed her because if she won't take a bottle. So I said, no, I'm staying, so you can take it out. So they took it out. In fact, she pulled it out herself and they just said, are we going to bother putting it back in or not? So they didn't.
Yeah.
But when it was out, she looked healthier. Immediately, psychologically, I was like, right, we're closer to going home because that's one less tube.
Yeah.
And then to have it put back in when she didn't need it. And obviously I wasn't there with her when this nurse put it back in. It was that, I think it's that it feels like an assault on you and your baby, doesn't it? Because you're already feeling very vulnerable. You're already out of control. You've already lost control over the birth, over this. I wanted a home birth, you know, everything literally went the opposite way I wanted. So that for her to take away the one thing I did to sort of have one sort of like little remnant of control over, was just brutal and
awful.
Yeah. And I am so glad we are talking more about birth trauma now, and it's kind of become part of our vocabulary. You know, everybody's talking about it. We're offering lots more support for women now. We talk to each other more about it. You know, that's brilliant. But what we are not validated in and what's not commonly talked about and what is not understood or kind of, not validated is anything around feeding that causes, and that was trauma for me and for you that was much worse than the others.
Yeah, and it's also funny because I mean, it's not funny. I say the word funny, but like you said, birth trauma is normalized now, right? It's a thing, and I would say if you would talk about this, what 100 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been a thing because everyone's births were probably pretty fucking traumatic, right? Like we didn't have, let's be honest, right? And then even further before that, with our antiset like it's called um, pain meds, it would have just been awful. But it's nice to know that in this day and age, we can talk about it and it's acceptable. But for some reason, and I still get this now, when they talk about breastfeeding, people are very quick to be like, well, if the baby's fed, isn't that as all that matters? And as you and I have experienced, like, yeah, I'm probably going to cry on this podcast because and maybe I didn't realize I was like this, but it's something that needs to be talked about more. Like in a world where we are, I mean, I'm going to talk about food, like we're going so much to ultra processed food and people not really caring as much as what they eat. Breastfeeding is the absolute best. Like fed is not best. Fed is bare minimum. If you cannot breastfeed, as you and I both agree, of course, formula is there for a reason. I've formula fed my other 3 children that, started off breastfeeding and then changed to formula. This is not about putting out down formula fed babies at all, but that should be the mother's choice, right? And we just don't talk about it. And I wonder how many women are out there feeling like you and me, through different circumstances, who feel lost,
So many. There'll be so many. And so many women who don't even have the label to put on what they feel because no one's talking about feeding trauma.
Yeah.
And so they don't even know how to express how they feel. They don't know why they feel the way they do. So, I mean, I've worked with and done debrief. So I trained as a debrief facilitator specifically for feeding traumas for this purpose, to help women kind of unpack and process and understand what happened with their feeding journey and,
Yeah.
help them move forward from it and heal from it.
Yeah.
But I've even helped and supported families who have got feeding traumas that aren't even breastfeeding related. So, for example, they didn't want to breastfeed, they wanted to formula feed, bottle feed. Fine, your choice, absolutely. It's got to be your choice. And that was fine. Everything went to plan, left hospital, went home, and then had a feeding trauma because the family and in-laws and other people just took over feeding. So
Mm.
mom had a significant feeding trauma because she just didn't expect that to be taken from her. So just because she
Yeah.
wasn't breastfeeding, she felt that feeding and those cozy cuddles on the
Moments.
sofa was sacred for her and that she should have been respected and allowed to
Yeah.
have that just for her. So that
Yeah.
instinct to feed your baby is not only to do with breastfeeding, but it can be bottle feeding as well. And she just got
Yeah.
home, the baby was whisked away, in-laws started feeding, and she was absolutely traumatized because
Yeah.
felt she lost control over her baby, and that was it. Then she could just, oh right, we can just get on with doing the washing now and doing
Yeah.
the bedding and
Interesting
crack on
note.
because we can feed the baby for you, so you can crack on.
Yeah, and it's funny because obviously that's coming from the best of intentions from family members, right? Like, let me help. It's not coming from a place, but that's where I think, as mothers, unfortunately, unless you've had multiple children and you start to find your voice, especially as a new mum, it can be really hard to find your voice, whether it's with family members, friends, medical professionals. It's really hard. You kind of just sit back because everything's so fucking overwhelming anyway. It's like you don't want to add to it. So, do you want to just explain maybe what breastfeeding trauma actually means? And I mean, you've given that example then. How else can it look?
I think a lot of women as well, I think from the starting point is you might not feel like you want to breastfeed necessarily or be particularly passionate one way or another. But what I think a lot of new mums don't expect is this surge of instinctual need to feed your baby that some of us, not all of us, but some of us do get. And it becomes this absolute necessity. I have to feed my baby. So I think we often don't expect it to be that intense, and it's biology, isn't it? It's
Mm.
what in the wild, in nature, what we would have to do.
Yeah.
And so I think it's that you can feel a lot more strongly about it once baby arrives than you ever imagined, because I didn't
Yeah.
think I would feel the way I do about it now. So I think it's knowing that is really good, but I think it can feel like hypervigilance. So if you have had a feeding trauma, it can be feeling like you're in fight or flight, feeling hypervigilant. So imagining disasters and catastrophes and having these intrusive thoughts that lots of us get postpartum anyway, but they can continue and
Yeah.
be worse. It can be not wanting other people to hold your baby. For
Yeah.
me, it was if anybody held her for an extended period of time and I wanted her back, and I'd sort of make, polite suggestions like, oh, I think she might need feeding now. And especially as a first time mum, when you don't not necessarily as aggressively assertive as
Yeah.
I was the
Yeah.
second time, where I was
Yeah.
like, back please, and just
Yeah.
pluck him basically. But the first time, kind of dancing around trying to be nice, but just give it
Yeah.
back. And if
Yeah.
anybody sort of held on to her a bit too long, I would start to panic. So I would have full blown panic attacks.
Yeah.
I would be, shaking. I didn't sleep very well. The thought of kind of any separation from her. So like, even like, in 9 months' time when I've got to go back to work, because we're, very lucky we get longer off, we get up to a year off here, which I know is not the case in lots of
No.
places, unfortunately. But just even like the future ever being separated from her, that caused me
Yeah.
huge anxiety. And I basically I had PTSD. So I had all the PTSD symptoms, very classic PTSD symptoms, anxiety. And I was so misunderstood because I also didn't at the time have this vocabulary to explain what I was feeling and where this had come from. And that realization and healing has only happened with a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
But I was trying to explain why I didn't want people to hold her. And everyone was like, nobody really could understand why I felt like that. And I didn't feel I was getting any understanding or validation because everyone was like, but we're just, it's not rational, is it? It's completely
Yeah.
irrational at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so then I got so anxious that I had my anxiety kind of physically presented itself. So I ended up with what they call a hemifacial spasm. So my whole side of the left side of my face went into spasm, where all of this side, so all three of my facial nerves pulled my face up to one side. So yeah, like
Wow.
Bell's palsy, but the opposite. So overactive instead of underactive. And it didn't go for a long time, didn't go for months. So it literally physically presented itself. It was that, I was that intensely anxious.
Yeah. Why do you think, I mean, that's a massive reaction, isn't it? And it's so funny because you're talking about how it might come out in different ways. And, I think we were talking about this the other week when with breastfeeding as well. Kids, work, school lunches, dinner, doing the washing, cleaning the house, taking the kids to after school activities. When was the last time you had a minute for you? If you follow me on socials, you'll know that we just came back from a retreat in Bali and it was incredible. When you're in a new place, you don't have your day-to-day responsibilities weighing you down, your guard comes down and something magical happens. If you missed out, don't stress. It's happening again in October and this time in the beautiful Byron Bay. It's 3 nights away. It includes your accommodation, all your meals, drinks, nutrition workshops, mindset workshops, yoga, workouts, and most importantly, space. Space to breathe, space to move your body, have a laugh, meet women just like you, learn something about yourself, and have a minute where no one is asking you what's for dinner. Spots are limited, so if you are craving a reset, come with us. I'd love to have you there. Head to danniduncan.com.au/Byron-retreat. There are so many reasons why women stop breastfeeding or can't breastfeed, and that must cause trauma as well. For example, I think I've probably had feeding trauma since Harper because I basically wasn't enjoying it, and then I got told that she was losing too much weight and then I should start formula feeding. So therefore I felt like I was failing as a breastfeeding mum. So then because I thought I was failing and I was shit at it, I was like, well, there's no point. Like I'm not doing the right thing anyway. But we don't have, I mean, I think sometimes we think we do have support, but potentially we just don't have the right support to help those mums in those spaces. And like your nurse changing the feeding tube, that maternal health nurse with Harper also didn't, help me in that space. So it's interesting. It could potentially come out in so many different ways. Women that get bad mastitis and can't continue because it's painful, cracked nipples, all those kinds of things. Also, not sure they're doing it right, the baby's not sleeping, all those kinds of things. And I know we briefly talked about the other day, actually, Lacevo's new red light therapy hopefully helps in that space as well, because I think, if mum can be happier, baby can get more milk, then feed longer. It's so good for both mum and baby, right?
Definitely.
Because when it works, and it's beautiful, as you know and I know.
Definitely.
But why isn't it getting the same recognition? Is it just not out there? What's the
We're still scared, aren't we, to promote breastfeeding too hard because we don't want to upset anybody that didn't want to. So I think we're really in fear of that and try not to upset anybody. And that
Yeah.
ends up where we don't talk about it openly enough.
Yeah.
And we almost feel that if we're traumatized because we couldn't do it, but we're surrounded by women who haven't done it through choice, we're scared to make them feel that they did something wrong, and it's not that at all. And every woman should have the choice and be supported with whatever her choice is. And so I think it's the lack of support out there as well, the lack of breastfeeding and feeding in general support. So like you say, when women, I mean, I'm still dealing with women who are being misdiagnosed with things like breast thrush, which for the last few years in the lactation world has been kind of dismissed as not real, not a thing. It doesn't exist. I'm still having women having swabs done in hospitals, and they're like, oh, but they found this microbiome, and so it's thrush. And I'm like, well, no, because your breast has a microbiome, like your vagina, it has a microbiome to stop, because it's protective.
Germs.
So of course, if they swab it, they're going to find a microbiome. There's lots of misinformation like that still out there, lots of outdated knowledge. The incorrect mastitis protocol, which has changed a couple of years ago, but still, if you use AI or you search on a search engine, you're going to come up with probably a lot of the old information because that's what's out there still. And I think as well, we just don't invest. A lot of women now are investing in, like we say, we're talking about birth trauma, that's much more out there. And preparing for birth is kind of commonplace now. We all go on hypnobirthing courses, we do antenatal, we do we read books. I was reading all these like free birth books and loads of stuff about like giving birth as a feminist, like the Millie Hill books. And I prepared myself for that, but I didn't read loads of lactation books. And I think 99% of the families and women that I support, if they'd have met me and spoken to me, had an hour's appointment with me before they had the baby, none of what they're having issues with now would have been issues, because it's all the biologically normal stuff that freak us out because we don't know what it is yet. So, like cluster feeding, when they feed constantly for hours and hours and hours at like in the evening for a few days when they're trying to boost your milk supply. And so, especially because we've also got a generation behind us who majority formula fed, we've lost that kind of that expertise around breastfeeding and that experience that mother to daughter, auntie to niece, friend to friend, sister to sister, we would have passed it down to each other. And we've lost that in the last 100 years since, formula feeding has become the norm. We've lost that expertise. So we don't have anybody to turn to and say, what's this? Why is she doing this? Why is she doing that? We don't have that. So unless we're investing in lactation support, we don't have that. I had one friend who had exclusively breastfed and had done for, an extended period of time. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have breastfed. I wouldn't have carried on.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because I just needed one person to ask.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it's so true, isn't it? We read all the books, we go to all the classes, we listen to podcasts, we do all the things about birth, and then we never literally prepare ourselves for breastfeeding. I think you get asked, are you going to breastfeed or not? You kind of have to decide on the spot. But I think again, this is not saying for people that can't breastfeed or don't want to breastfeed, this is not, again, against them or anything. As I said, I've formula fed two of my children. Sort of, I suppose, it would be upsetting, or it is upsetting, that women feel like they have to stop or don't even try because they don't have the support, or they don't know what they're doing. Or I think, like you said before, I think sometimes, they say, oh, we're supposed to know what to do, right? Because we're a woman and it's instinctive and we're supposed to, but it's not that simple. Like you said, because we don't have that mother to daughter, auntie to niece type thing. When you can't do it, you suddenly feel guilty and, like you're a failure. And so then you stop because, oh, well, I can't do it and I'm a shit mum, so I may as well formula feed. But the benefits of breastfeeding are massive for baby and mum. And we know that if women, like kids are breastfed even past 2, there's benefits still, and for mum as well. So yeah, if we can actually start talking about it and educating women before they have the baby and be there right with them, and not just about like, this is how you put the baby on your boob, like all those little things that you're talking about. Imagine what that would do for society. Would have the, it would just, I think it would make everything like, well, people would be happier, healthier, all the good things.
Definitely. I think, there's a lot about longevity, isn't there, at the moment, about how do we, and a lot of your content is around that too, how do we help people with longevity? And one of the kind of completely free ways, not free in terms of time and effort, but free financially, ways that we can improve human longevity is through increasing breastfeeding rates.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you have to exclusively breastfeed, because our bodies actually know how much milk is being taken out. And so when you get to kind of natural weaning and you're kind of down to one tiny little feed, like my daughter is now, your body knows. And so it packs as much as it possibly can into those tiny little drops.
Yeah.
Because it's like here's a bit extra just in case. I'm trying to try not to cry now. Here's a little bit extra just in case. Like, I know it's almost done now, and I need to make sure I'm giving you the last bit I can possibly give you before this is over, to make sure you're safe, basically. So your body will just pour everything into those little drops. So a lot of women feel like they have to kind of stop when they go back to work, and that means you have to stop completely. But our milk supply is so clever that it even knows what day of the week it is. So if you have like a routine where you do a night shift, you do a day shift, you work 3 days or you work 5 days, your body will just adapt, and you can just keep the feeds you want or just keep the pumps you want and forget all the rest. It's so adaptive. And I think that's another misconception we have, that it's kind of an all or nothing thing. And especially for women in like America, where my sister is, where they get, and I think it's not as, I'm not sure exactly what it's like in Australia, but they've got a tiny little portion of time where they can be off with their baby. It's not impossible to breastfeed, even though you've only got a short period of time. It's just about kind of planning it and making it work for you. And I can certainly help families to do that. It's very hard to do that alone without expertise, especially if it's your first time.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I've, as you know, so I was exclusively breastfeeding London, oh man, and then I had to stop, and I did have a certain amount of milk for her, and then we had to move to donated milk for a period, because I did not want her off breast milk as a choice that I'd made, and also I wanted her to relatch. But through chemo, like I had a ridiculous supply as well the whole time I was feeding her. Through chemo, I managed to hold on for the first probably couple of months to my supply, and then it did slowly. I mean, the drugs in my system and all the stuff that was going on obviously took a toll on my body. So then when I started back again, she was still having 2 bottles, and I was still managing to get enough, but her bottle was less milk. But then I was able to then bring it back up again, and then I've gone back down. So we are able to manipulate, if you want, or is that the right word? I don't know. Our milk supply. Yeah.
Definitely.
Based on
I think in the early days, it's very much about telling your body that there's lots of milk being removed as much as possible in those early days when baby's very little. And once that supply is sort of established, it's very hard to knock it off. So
Yeah.
a lot of women worry about an oversupply, but really the only thing we should worry about in the early days is an undersupply. So you can kind of
Yeah.
tell your body it needs more than you need to give more than it actually does, but it's very hard to get a dramatic oversupply unless you were like pumping 8 times a day and then feeding the baby. You need to have to really aggressively, tell your body it needed more. But again, we can then deal with that afterwards. Because I was told to pump like a crazy woman in the hospital. I was literally pumping around the clock, and I did end up with an oversupply. But it's amazing how quickly you can communicate to your body that it doesn't need to do that anymore.
Well,
so
that
when
was
I
the
went
thing.
back
When
to
I
work, I think it took 3 days for my body to just stop making milk at the time that she needed it.
Before I started chemo, I think I had 4 weeks in between finding out I had to have chemo and starting chemo, and I was like, right, I need to freeze as much as possible. So I upped my pumps, and so I upped my supply. So I was feeding her still, obviously, and pumping, because I was like, well, I still need to feed her. And then I was like, so it was, I managed to get it up, and then obviously it went down during chemo, and then went back up again after. And then it's coming back down. And even now, like, I don't get much here, like probably like you. I pump 100 mils for her, and she has it at night. But if I do have to go away, I know that if I just pump for even just an extra 10 minutes either side, I can get an extra 100 mils, pretty easily if I have to go away for any reason. But it's all those little things, right? Like knowing what to do and knowing how you can, like, I had to do my own research when it came to my cancer. So I had found no one that pumped and dumped through chemo. I don't know if anyone else in the world has. And when people see that I've done it, that have cancer, they're like, I didn't even know this. Like, I've stopped, I've given my baby formula. And that's why this conversation is so important, because it's like, you don't have to stop, and your baby doesn't have to go onto formula if you don't want to. If you're going through something like what I went through.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the value of keeping it going. I mean, just for your mental health through it all as well, because it obviously produces so much oxytocin. And whether, obviously, even if you've just had a baby and you don't have to go through something like what you went through, it's so protective against, when our mental health is so delicate. And obviously there's been lots of stuff in the news globally recently about, a really sad case about perinatal mental health, and questioning, why we're not supported the way we should be during basically our brain just undoing itself and putting itself back together again. And then you throw in all the hormones, at least that oxytocin that's released every time you feed is just washing over you and just keeping you mentally safe. And so when you were going through such a horrendously stressful experience, that oxytocin would have been helping you, and it obviously helps the baby too.
Yeah, I didn't think of it like that, and it's nice. That's a nice thought process, actually, because I often say London saved me. Like, that's like, I had 2 prior miscarriages, and I was always like, why did I have 2 miscarriages? But without those miscarriages, I couldn't have had her and she. But then, so now you've just told me another reason that she saved me.
Definitely.
Because maybe that's why I did so well during chemo, because I did that. So
and all the Hamlet cells that are in your breast milk, that our Hamlet cells are special cells that they don't exist anywhere else in the human body. They're not found anywhere else in nature apart from in breast milk. And they are these incredible white blood cells that are cancer killers. So they are programmed to hunt down and kill cancer. So they're obviously released into your body as well when you're breastfeeding. So they don't just stay, they're mostly in the breast, which is why it's so preventative for breast cancer. But they also, our cells obviously migrate through our body. So it's preventative for, to have that still happening in your body when you are fighting cancer, and also giving those, those Hamlet cells to your children, is just incredible. And that's why they are investigating breast milk and the cure for cancer.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, they started
Okay.
in like bladder cancer,
Yeah,
and
wow.
obviously they don't damage the other cells. They only
Yeah,
hunt down and kill the cancer cells.
that's incredible. Gosh, see? It's just so yeah, all the things it can do is just incredible. So, apart from obviously yourself, Nick, what other support exists at the moment for other women going through trauma? And is it enough?
I mean, I think perinatal mental health is improving, but I think there's still a lot that needs to be better.
Yeah.
And because there's so many facets to what our experiences are, it's really hard to separate birth trauma from feeding trauma. And it's so complex. The whole perinatal
Mm,
period is so complex, isn't it? But I think you know, talking therapy, if you have a trauma like a PTSD response to a trauma like I have, talking therapy doesn't is not the best way for a lot of people because
yeah.
it's not what they would recommend, what counselors and psychotherapists recommend for trauma, because you basically just rehash the whole thing every time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't, it's because when you have a trauma it's basically a memory in your brain. So PTSD is a memory that has happened at a time of significant trauma. And so it doesn't get filed into the right part of your brain. So that
Mm,
memory is just kind of live in your brain all the time. And that's why you feel this kind of fight or flight, kind of panic,
yeah.
hypervigilance like I did, because your brain is still wondering what it's going to do with this memory and it hasn't filed it away.
Yeah.
So it's exhausting as well because your brain can't ever switch off completely. And so
Mm,
there are treatments that allow your brain to file that away into kind of
yeah.
a
Okay.
safe part of your brain, and then it can function more normally. So I had kind of a rewind, which is where, yeah, it's like a processing where your brain processes the memory, puts it into the right part of your brain. So I had a rewind, and then that worked for a little bit with a psychotherapist, but I had to pay for this privately because
Yeah.
this sort of
Yeah.
treatment is
Of
not
course.
on the NHS standard,
No.
or it wasn't at the time. And then this time around, having my son kind of brought a lot of that back again.
Yeah. Of course.
And it kind of went all the way back to, because I lost my dad when I was younger. So this whole kind of like loss of control, it was linked. I kind of reacted even more strongly to it with my children because of what had historically happened to me anyway. So I think
Yeah.
that's why I had such an intense reaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had EDMR, yeah, EMDR,
Yeah.
EDMR, I always get it mixed up. But the
Yeah.
rapid eye movement desensitization.
Yeah.
So they can do it with flashing lights, or they can do it with kind of pulses. So you hold on to these like pulses that vibrate in your hands, and it basically, you can feel your brain moving from one hemisphere to the other, and it
Interesting.
basically compartmentalizes the trauma. So they're the kind of treatments that I've had. But in all
Yeah.
different, countries, it'll be different, won't it? Whether you've
Yeah.
got health insurance, what it covers, what the NHS
Yeah.
provides, and I think we all can just unfortunately fall into a bit of no man's land very easily, where you can be really lucky and get an amazing lactation consultant that's on duty that particular day when you've just had a
Yeah.
baby, and then you can be really lucky because your trust or where you live, you get great perinatal mental health support, or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
you can also be really unlucky.
Yeah.
The problem is
Yeah.
that lots of women
Yeah.
I speak to are just very unlucky and
Unlucky.
didn't have the right people at the right time.
Totally. I mean, and that is just you can't even pick that, right? In hospital, you just get what you're given. You can't
Yeah.
choose. If there's someone listening to this right now, a woman who had to stop breastfeeding or not even had to stop breastfeeding for any reason, this has hit something in her, recognizes her in this, I suppose, in this conversation, what do you want her to know?
That you can get better, and
Yeah.
that there are people out there like us and like me that can help you work your way through it and feel seen and heard and validated, possibly for the first time, and
Yeah.
that there is a way to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I just think that hope that this conversation, gets heard everywhere, because I think there are lots of probably women sitting there silently crying, whether that's with a baby on their boob, with a baby off their boob, with a child that's no longer a baby that still thinks back and, to times. And I think, I know you mainly work with breastfeeding women, but do you work with at all like women that aren't breastfeeding anymore that have had to stop for whatever reason?
Yeah, I've worked with mums with 16 and 17-year-olds who have
Yeah.
still got a feeding trauma from when they were
Yeah.
babies. So this
Yeah.
is, if this kind of, strikes a chord with anybody, just know your feelings are valid and they're very much biologically normal. And yeah, I will understand if anyone wants to reach out, for support. I have felt all the feelings and
Yeah.
I would love
Yeah.
to support more women with, coming to terms with these things, but your feelings are totally valid.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, healthcare providers, I don't know, I have no idea about here. I know we do have access to Breastfeeding Australia, who are actually really helpful. I jumped on the phone to them a couple of times during, my ordeal, because I just needed someone, I suppose, kind of like you would be, I suppose, to someone, someone completely neutral that I didn't know, that just to listen to my story. But do we need more like healthcare providers being on top of this? Like, is that step one?
Definitely. What I have loved seeing is that lots of kind of breastfeeding brands are starting to. So I've been involved in some research recently with a big, kind of breast pump and breastfeeding products brand who are looking into feeding trauma more. So that's really
Yeah.
reassuring. But also
Yeah.
starting to see more breast pump brands starting to hire kind of online, remote kind of 24-hour support kind of thing,
Yeah.
lactation consultants that they
Yeah.
have like an in-house person who can just answer queries around the
Yeah.
product that they're using, because then obviously it encourages women to use it for longer, use it more
Yeah.
effectively. And so I've seen that happening more and more, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's chronically under supported as a,
Yeah. Yeah.
lactation just is, it's not a priority in many
No.
countries, and it really should be. But as of what,
Yeah.
because of what we said about longevity and,
Totally.
reducing infant mortality, reducing cancers in the mums, in the babies, reducing, gastroenteritis and things like that in infants, which can be so dangerous at that age.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so beneficial. Ear infections, oral development, speech development,
Yeah.
reduction in needing, orthodontics when you're older. As somebody who's had 2 braces, that's a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's the benefits are just vast, and so it
Yeah.
really does need more support, but unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's not there at the moment, but hopefully
No.
things are
Yeah.
on the move and
Coming along.
are changing, because I do feel that finally, after many years of, probably the last 100 years, breastfeeding is kind of coming back into being more
Yeah.
mainstream rather than being a bit of a woo-woo mum that breastfeeds.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Well, did you want to tell everyone how they can work with you, who you help? Can you help people internationally? Obviously, I've got a very big Australian audience. And then where they can find you as well.
Yeah, of course. I work with women in all different time zones, all different countries. So, yes, I can support anybody. And like we said before, it doesn't matter how long it's been since your breastfeeding journey, whether it's about to happen. I do preparing to breastfeed sessions. I support with issues, tongue ties, with all of the things, anything that you're struggling with as a mom, pain, discomfort, anything. I support with that during your breastfeeding journey. And then it could be 30 years after your baby was breastfeeding and you still feel
Yeah.
you want to process that experience. I can work with you. So I'm on Instagram, infantfeedingcoach.jersey, because I live in Jersey and the Channel Islands.
So cool.
And my website is the same, Infant Feeding Coach Jersey.
Love it. Perfect. And we'll put all of that in the show notes anyway, so people can find you easily.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Nick. I really appreciate the chat.
You too. It's been lovely to thank you for having me on.
You're welcome.